Recently, two of the world's largest theme park operators, Six Flags and Cedar Fair, merged and became one huge super company. They will now be responsible for 26 different parks across the continent, 23 in the United States, 2 in Canada, and 1 in Mexico. Right around the same time this happened, I got to check out my final 2 parks in the combined company's portfolio, meaning it's time I do what so many of you have called on me to do. I'm gonna rank every single one of these parks from worst to best. But this is by no means an easy task, as I have to recollect all of these past experiences that vary in enjoyment depending on a variety of factors. To keep it short, great roller coasters don't automatically warrant a high spot for me. If a park's operations or policies limit the amount of rides you can get on a given day, then of course I'll draw issue with that. No one likes waiting in lines, and unfortunately most of the 15 legacy Six Flags parks struggle with that issue. Of course, there are some exceptions, as it ultimately comes down to the team at park level. But the 11 legacy Cedar Fair parks often perform better in this area, hence why you'll see many of their parks ranked towards the top. I also pay close attention to a park's appearance and atmosphere, as I want to feel welcomed and cared for as a guest. Aside from these 3 things, ride lineup, operations, and ambiance, it's important to keep in mind that I've only been to most of these parks one time. It's possible that on the days I visited, crews and employees were worse than normal or better than normal. It's why I don't doubt my list will even be remotely similar to yours, and I invite you to let me know your rankings in the comment section below. Alright, now let's get into it, as I'm sure this video will be quite long. Number 26 is La Ronde in Montreal, Quebec. The only legacy Six Flags park in Canada is one that I had on my list for a while prior to my visit just a few weeks ago. Despite its poor reputation, I had hoped for an overall positive experience, and with a meticulously well thought out plan, I'd say we enjoyed our day more than we anticipated. But that's solely because our expectations were in the right place, not at all because the park was good. All the Six Flags stereotypes that annoy the crap out of people are more prevalent at La Ronde than any other I've been to. The operations are abysmal, the park is ugly, there's abandoned rides and attractions everywhere. It really feels as though it's neglected by its parent company. The saving grace to all of this is the ride collection isn't all too bad. They have a spectacular headlining roller coaster in Goliath, a few solid supporting coasters in La Vampire, La Monster, and Dragon, and a few nice flat rides too. La Ronde isn't all bad, and it certainly got a lot of potential, but as it stands, I doubt I'll be returning for a very long time, if ever. Number 25, Michigan's Adventure in Muskegon, Michigan. By far the weakest of the legacy Cedar Fair parks, this one too has a lot wrong with it and is awfully ignored relative to its sister parks. Probably the worst thing about Michigan's Adventure is it has a very poor atmosphere. As a matter of fact, I'm not sure it has an atmosphere, the place just feels dead. It is a much prettier park than La Ronde though, and doesn't seem like it's falling apart. It's just a shame that they haven't received any major investments in decades. Their ride lineup suffers as a result with just 2 good coasters really. Shivering Timbers, their standout attraction, is absolutely outstanding and is what makes this park worth visiting despite its flaws. 2, Wolverine Wildcat is a heck of a lot better than people give it credit for in my opinion. But beyond that, there's not much that excites me personally, though I will say for younger guests they do have a very nice kids area and that felt a whole lot more modern than the rest of the park. Unless you're a die-hard coaster enthusiast like myself, I'd say it's not really worth going out of your way for Michigan's Adventure. Hell, if they didn't have Shivering Timbers, I'm not sure I'd recommend it, period. But with some love and TLC, I'm sure this one could skyrocket up my rankings, so I hope the new Six Flags company will seriously consider that as a possibility. Number 24, Frontier City in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. This smaller theme park is one that I had to travel pretty out of the way for, and though I don't think I'd ever do it again, I do not regret it. It's a heck of a lot better than the past 2 parks on this list, despite the fact that its rides and roller coasters might be the weakest of all of them. It similarly gets very little investment, and aside from their Diamondback roller coaster, which seems to be closed more than it's open anyway, and a few decent flat rides, nothing here stands out all too much. What compensates for this is Frontier City has superior theming and atmosphere than a lot of the parks in the chain. Unfortunately, it's not always consistent, as some areas feel more Six Flagsy and take you out of the immersion, but for the most part, I really enjoyed walking around and exploring the place. Once again, I don't think I'd seek out Frontier City as a must-visit park, but if you do happen to be nearby, it makes for a solid day trip. Number 23, Six Flags Darien Lake in Corfu, New York. I had heard lots of mixed things about this park over the years and was surprised by how much I enjoyed it despite only being there a few hours. It does look rather generic with your blacktop and advertisements everywhere, but I noticed a decent effort towards landscaping the place, and I think the setting with all those lakes is quite beautiful. I had heard ride operations weren't great, though luckily it doesn't seem to get too busy here even in the summer, which certainly was the case for us. So that wasn't an issue. The biggest downside was the obnoxiously poor atmosphere that would be made so much better by placing a few speakers around the park. For some reason, it's just eerily quiet, so that wasn't the most inviting. Looking at their rides, there's a handful of really enjoyable roller coasters, including Ride of Steel, Tantrum, Predator, plus some decent flat rides. I feel that Darien Lake could make for a disappointing experience on the wrong day, but I was pleasantly surprised by my experience here. Number 22, Six Flags Great Escape in Queensbury, New York. My final theme park within the combined company, I was glad to end not with a bang, but still a place that had enough redeeming qualities to warrant a visit. And I say redeeming qualities because this park has 3 of the worst roller coasters I've ever been on. Do yourself a favor and avoid Steamin' Demon, Flashback, and Canyon Blaster at all costs. But they do counteract this with 2 great coasters and some nice flat rides. Comet and Bobcat are a spectacular wooden roller coaster duo, and Adirondack Outlaw is outstanding, possibly my single favorite non-coaster ride at any park on this list. Contrary to most legacy Six Flags parks, Great Escape stands out with some surprising bits of theming and a charming atmosphere. I really enjoyed all the fairy tale storybook stuff, even if it wasn't necessarily meant for my target audience. This one I'd say is a nice park for what it is, still with some major flaws, but worth a stop since it's not too far from other major parks like Six Flags New England, which we'll get to later. Number 21, Six Flags Discovery Kingdom in Vallejo, California. Earlier I gave the caveat that my experience might fluctuate greatly from yours, but I feel the need to reiterate that here, as though my one day here was solid, I hear awful things about Six Flags Discovery Kingdom's operations and policies. I think on a repeat visit, this one could fall several spots, and that's a shame because it should be a great theme park. It's got a respectable selection of rides from Joker, an amazing headlining coaster, as well as Medusa, Superman, Flash, and their assortment of flat rides. On top of that, the back of the park is basically a zoo, which is very unique relative to almost every other park in the chain. Like many others, however, it's got inconsistency in its appearance, with some sections looking great, but most being just okay. And despite our potentially above average experience here, operations still were quite slow considering the park was actually quite busy. Discovery Kingdom is another park that's solid, but far from perfect, and could be a lot better with a few minor changes. Number 20, Six Flags America in Bowie, Maryland. Up until this point, I imagine my rankings have been pretty agreeable for most of you guys, but this very well may be where that ends. Time and time again, I hear atrocious things about Six Flags America and see people placing it towards the very bottom of their list of these parks. So you could imagine my shock when I walked away with a pretty positive impression of the place. Does it do everything right? Well, no, definitely not, but I think there's been a lot of changes made to better Six Flags America that frankly so many other parks we've discussed should be following suit with. Operations, for example, were tremendous when I visited, even with minimal crowds in the heat of the summer, and they have redone some sections that have been previously neglected. Additionally, I feel that the rides and roller coasters here are a lot better than the consensus. Superman Ride of Steel, Batwing, Joker's Jinx, and Wild One are all fantastic, plus the nice assortment of flat rides. Despite all these positives, I still wouldn't call the park pretty, actually quite the opposite. It's one of the more generic looking Six Flags parks. But for that to be my only major complaint for a park that often gets torn apart by this community is really quite impressive. I think Six Flags America is one of the more underrated parks on this list. Speaking of which, at 19 I've got Six Flags St. Louis in Eureka, Missouri. Again, I didn't really get the consensus with this one. St. Louis was operated fine. It's another park I hear dreadful things about, but during my single visit here, I had a great time. I actually do have a lot of the same thoughts as Six Flags America, so I'm not going to repeat it all, but I'd say one of the more significant differences were the operations were only okay compared to Six Flags America. But I think I like the ride lineup here better, with an incredibly underrated headlining coaster in Boss, along with Mr. Freeze Reverse Blast, American Thunder, Batman the Ride, and so much more. There's a great flat ride collection here as well, including 2 new ones that I've yet to experience, the Giant Frisbee Ride Joker Carnival of Chaos, and Catwoman's Whip, which is the only clone of Adirondack Outlaw in the chain, and after riding that, I can't wait to come back here and experience it. I hope they invest in park appearance next, but all things considered, I like this park quite a lot, and it's well worth pairing with the others in Missouri. Number 18, Six Flags New England in Agawam, Massachusetts. This park I've spent a lot of time at, and I've seen the ups and downs here. The ups of which are great, highs that propel this park above all the rest, but the downs are super annoying. Six Flags bullcrap that I'd say is very apparent here depending on the day. I've had lots of iffy experiences with operations, policies, the park randomly closing for arbitrary reasons, our stuff getting jammed in lockers, and the staff can't help you. You get the point. But the park does actually look quite nice and has a pretty respectable atmosphere. And I love the 2 headlining coasters at this park. Wicked Cyclone, which has always been an all-time favorite, and Superman the Ride, which despite being maybe a little overhyped for me, still offers a terrific layout. Batman the Dark Knight, Thunderbolt, and a handful of nice flat rides help as well, but I do feel that Six Flags New England suffers in the supporting ride lineup compared to other parks of its size. That'd be my biggest major complaint, but I think the upcoming Quantum Accelerator should help. As is though, it's a mostly very fun park to visit. Number 17, Worlds of Fun in Kansas City, Missouri. You may have noticed that we haven't spent much time talking about the legacy Cedar Fair parks thus far, and that's because all of them but Michigan's Adventure are actually quite great. I mean, Worlds of Fun, across my 2 visits, could have been run with more sufficient operations, don't get me wrong, but otherwise, I really liked what they had on offer. There's a handful of great coasters like Prowler, Mamba, Timberwolf, and Patriot, a handful of decent flat rides, and the park in general looks really nice. Great landscaping, and a fair amount of theming too. Beyond this, I feel like I should reserve judgment since my memory of this one is possibly the most foggy of all the parks on this list. So I'm definitely due for a revisit, especially to try their newest roller coaster, Zambezi Zinger. Number 16, California's Great America in Santa Clara, California. A few years ago, I would have had this park several spots higher on my list, but once we heard the unfortunate news of its permanent closure, they've slowly been phasing things out. I got to come back to the park for a second visit in the midst of all this, and while I love the roller coasters and rides, they're just as good as ever, I just felt that the operations and park appearance were declining. And from what I've heard, this has been very apparent for regular visitors of Great America. It's a shame considering the direction this park was headed after years of promise towards a bright future. It seemed that Cedar Fair was going to start pouring loads of investment into this place, but I guess the land was too expensive and they saw an opportunity to profit by selling it to someone else. While it's still around, be sure to swing by and give it a visit. Gold Striker, Railblazer, and Flight Deck are all incredible. They have some great flat rides too, and in general, I have always and will always love this park. Number 15, Valley Fair in Shakopee, Minnesota. You know, considering I'd routinely heard this park was bottom tier relative to its brethren, my expectations were thoroughly exceeded. I don't necessarily disagree with the sentiment, but when just about every legacy Cedar Fair park is great, I feel like that overlooks a lot of what makes this one awesome. It's so well taken care of with fantastic landscaping, relatively swift operations, and a terrific atmosphere. The main thing holding it back is it's got a pretty weak coaster collection. Renegade is the only one here I'd consider to be spectacular, but Excalibur, Steel Venom, and Wild Thing are also solid. To be fair, the flat rides here are actually pretty damn good. I just wish this park received some more well-deserved investment. Valley Fair is definitely underappreciated, a fantastic park overall. Number 14, Six Flags Over Texas in Arlington, Texas. The original Six Flags theme park, Over Texas, I think combines the good and the bad of the company. On one hand, the park looks really good and has a fantastic atmosphere, but it too seems fairly neglected, especially considering how popular it is. The coaster lineup, in my personal opinion, is actually a little weak compared to similar parks of its size. Mr. Freeze is my favorite here, and though it's a fantastic coaster, it's not really a sufficient standout ride in my opinion. Others would argue for New Texas Giant, but that was always rather disappointing for me, as is Shockwave. Again, still really fun rides, but not all that in my opinion. They do boast a nice supporting collection of coasters and flat rides, which definitely helps, but like with so many others, I love it if they got another major investment soon, preferably something that can make this park a definite must visit. Still, Six Flags Over Texas is worth checking out and a great park for what it is. Number 13, Dorney Park in Allentown, Pennsylvania. This one I think might surprise some people, because while I've always enjoyed this park more than average in this community, their long-awaited new coaster Iron Menace really balanced out their ride lineup far beyond so many of these others. While I still find them to be lacking in a true standout coaster, the list of great rides here is basically never-ending. Talon, Steel Force, Possessed, Iron Menace, Hydra the Revenge, Demon Drop, so many nice flat rides too. The atmosphere here is great, and the place visually is spectacular. It feels like it's very nicely taken care of, and it's always a pleasure to just walk around and take things in. What a great team to back Dorney up. I feel that its future is looking brighter than ever, and it should be high on your list if you're in the area. Number 12, Six Flags Over Georgia in Austell, Georgia. This park I find quite interesting because, putting the rides aside, it's not my favorite in the world. Operations tend to be rather poor, and parts of the park could definitely use some TLC. But it is really forested and the setting is quite nice, so I enjoy some aspects of its appearance. Really what allows it to rank this high is its incredibly diverse selection of rides. With 13 roller coasters ranging from mild to super intense, there's something here for everyone. Goliath is my personal favorite B&M hypercoaster out there in the world, an extremely underappreciated headlining attraction. Beyond that, the supporting lineup with Twisted Cyclone, Daredevil Dive, Georgia Scorcher, Batman the Ride, Superman Ultimate Flight, and Great American Scream Machine is very impressive. Plus, the upcoming Georgia Surfer should only add to this, finally giving Over Georgia a launch coaster. The flat rides are also very solid, not to mention Monster Mansion, which is a personal favorite of mine. Minus the time I showed up to Atlanta and the park was closed due to weather despite there being a 30% chance of rain at 2 p.m., I have always had a great experience here. I just wish it were run a bit better. Number 11, Knott's Berry Farm in Buena Park, California. The closest park in the chain to home, I've visited Knott's dozens of times over the years and know it like the back of my hand. But the fact that I have all these experiences may very well be why this doesn't rank as high for me, because I've seen a lot of what this park does not do well, which enthusiasts tend to ignore. And look, I do recognize that Knott's does so much well. It's by far the most well-themed park on this list, with some beautiful, immersive areas and so much charm. It's also impressive, despite its size, how many rides they've managed to pack in. Ghost Rider, Accelerator, and Hang Time are all great coasters, and I enjoy many of the other attractions like Timber Mountain Log Ride, Calico Mine Ride, Knott's Berry Tales, Calico River Rapids, and I look forward to the upcoming reimagined Montezuma's Revenge. My biggest problem with this place are the operations are by far the worst of all of the legacy Cedar Fair parks. Like if you come here in the heat of the summer, there's a good chance you might only get on like 3 or 4 things all day. It is a really highly attended park, so I wonder if the staff and employees just get overwhelmed by how busy it can get. But nevertheless, I much prefer the way nearby parks like Disney or Universal handle crowds. On the right day, Knott's Berry Farm can offer an unforgettable experience though. Number 10, Six Flags Great Adventure in Jackson, New Jersey. One of the flagship parks in the chain, Great Adventure is another one that isn't operated the way it should. However, the rides and roller coasters are so unbelievably impressive that it far outweighs the cons. This park is home to King Dakar, the tallest roller coaster in the world, El Toro, one of the world's great wooden coasters, Jersey Devil, a record-setting single rail coaster, and the list goes on. There is an extraordinarily deep supporting lineup beyond that: Nitro, Medusa, Batman, Superman, and the upcoming Flash Vertical Velocity, which should be great. The park just doesn't consistently look the best and has some pretty abysmal operations at times. And maybe it's just because I've been here on so many different occasions, but I feel the same way I do with Six Flags New England, where there's just so many little things that can make your experience far less enjoyable than its competitors. As long as you're strategic and visit at the right time, this can be another unbelievable park experience. Well worth the risk in my opinion. Number 9, Carowinds in Charlotte, North Carolina. I just recently had the opportunity to visit this park for a second time and walked away enjoying it even more than before. The park has put in a lot of effort to refresh certain areas that previously maybe weren't the most impressive. It's got its fair share of theming now, and the place is very well taken care of. I personally don't think the atmosphere and southern charm is as exceptional as others make it out to be, same with the operations, but they're definitely above average compared to many parks on this list. The real reason it places as high as it does is the coaster lineup is great. Fury 325 is one of the best ever built. I always enjoy lapping Copperhead Strike, and Afterburn and the recently renamed Intimidator, now known as Thunder Striker, are also very good. Also, I cannot for the life of me understand why Nighthawk gets so much hate. I love that ride. Flat rides here are just okay relative to other parks of its size, but really nothing to complain about. In the future, I'd love to see the addition of a few water rides, but other than that, I think Carowinds is a great time. Number 8, King's Dominion in Doswell, Virginia. This one I don't think gets as much praise as I tend to give it, but every single time I've gotten to come to King's Dominion, I've had an amazing day. By no means are the operations terrific, but I'd say every single other element that makes for a great park is prevalent in this one. The place is absolutely beautiful and super wooded in some sections. It's the first park on this list aside from Knott's Berry Farm and maybe La Ronde that I'd say has really good food, and best of all, they have one of the greatest 1-2 coaster punches in the world. The soon-to-be rethemed and renamed Intimidator 305 is absolutely the most intense roller coaster I've ever experienced, and Twisted Timbers acts as a phenomenal complement with airtime out the wazoo. And I love all the theming they've added into this park, along with the news that they'll be receiving a launched B&M wing coaster in 2025. King's Dominion's future looks bright, and it's absolutely what they deserve. Number 7, Six Flags Mexico in Mexico City. The only Six Flags or Cedar Fair park in Latin America, this place has a special charm to it that you rarely see across the combined company. It is so beautiful and extraordinarily well taken care of, with great landscaping and architecture. And contrary to most other legacy Six Flags parks, the operations here are superb and very speedy. Ride-wise, it's not as strong a place as several locations that place lower, but you still do have a great top 2 with Superman El Ultimo Escape and Medusa Steel Coaster. After that, there's a big gap in quality, making for a subpar supporting coaster lineup, but in general, it's not all about the coasters here. It's just one of those parks that's a pleasure to walk around and take in the atmosphere, which is one of my favorites I've ever experienced. Number 6, Canada's Wonderland in Vaughan, Ontario. The country's flagship theme park, Wonderland is a place I've always loved more than I think a lot of enthusiasts do. It's often talked about for having loads of awful coasters, and I'll agree that there is a hefty amount for a park of this size, but to combat this, there are some great coasters too. Leviathan, Behemoth, and Yukon Striker are a terrific trio of B&Ms. Starting next year, they'll have a great big launch coaster to complement their lineup. I'd also put this up there as one of the best parks in the world for flat rides. It's amazing just how many unique and thrilling ones they have on offer, and it totally makes up for the coasters maybe not being as good as could be. Above all, what I love most about this park is its presentation, landscaping, atmosphere, and even theming in some areas. It's a wonderful park to walk around and easily one of my favorite Legacy Cedar Fair parks in that regard. I think Alpine Fury will make it a must-visit park in 2025, and I cannot wait to return. Number 5, Six Flags Great America in Gurnee, Illinois. I wasn't sure what to expect from this park going into it, as I've had mixed experiences at the largest Six Flags parks, but I was pleasantly surprised by how well this park was ran and how it looks too. It's surprisingly pleasant with one of the most well-rounded coaster lineups in the world. Their top attraction I wouldn't say is mind-blowing compared to most of these other parks, but if you can ignore that, Goliath, Raging Bull, Max Force, X-Flight, American Eagle, Viper, and the new dive coaster will be a terrific lineup. It's borderline a 2-day park in my opinion, especially if you've never been before. I absolutely love Great America and I can't wait to return for more in the future. Number 4, Six Flags Magic Mountain in Valencia, California. Ah yes, the park that I've spent possibly more time at than any other. I have made so many phenomenal memories at this place and will forever be grateful for it because of that. It's far from a perfect park, and we'll get into that, but there's probably no other place on the planet aside from one other park that we'll talk about later that has this great of a coaster lineup. I won't discuss them all individually or we'd be here all day, but X2, Twisted Colossus, Wonder Woman Flight of Courage, Apocalypse, Tatsu, Full Throttle, Superman Escape from Krypton, and West Coast Racers are all great just to name a few of the 20 coasters here. I also love some of their flat rides, and as the name implies, Magic Mountain is a terrific location. In many ways, it sort of feels like an oasis in the middle of a desert. Unfortunately, ride operations can be atrocious here, which is why I'd highly recommend coming on a non-peak weekday. The only downside is you do risk some of the big coasters being closed, which can also be pretty annoying. Like with most Legacy Six Flags parks, some areas could use an update, but it's not as dire since they do have this old school feel to them. Just an all-around incredible place despite its flaws. There is nowhere else in the world like Magic Mountain. Number 3, Six Flags Fiesta Texas in San Antonio, Texas. Of all the parks in the top 5, Fiesta Texas might just have the weakest coaster lineup. Not that it's bad or anything, it's still one of the best out there. However, it's for other reasons that I consider this the best of the Legacy Six Flags parks. I had never been to one that was this well kept. Absolutely beautiful theming, architecture, landscaping, a magnificent setting with a quarry wall, and stellar ride operations. In my opinion, it hardly feels like a Six Flags, and that's for the better. Iron Rattler, Wonder Woman Golden Lasso Coaster, and Superman Krypton Coaster are 3 amazing rides, along with several strong supporters, including a bundle of nice flat rides, water rides, and dark rides. It's one of the most well-rounded theme parks I think I've ever been to, and I can't wait to return for their new dive coaster, Dr. Diabolical's Cliffhanger, in the future. Number 2, Cedar Point in Sandusky, Ohio. It might have surprised some of you just now that I didn't put the park with the best roller coasters in the world at number 1. Truth be told, Steel Vengeance, Maverick, and Millennium Force are all unbelievable, and I've heard great things about the new Top Thrill 2 as well. A super deep supporting cast of coasters and flat rides complement their stupidly diverse collection of attractions, and I cannot wait for the new Siren's Curse tilt coaster. But on top of that, the atmosphere and location for this park don't even feel real. It comes across as this paradise or roller coaster mecca, and to be fair, it is. But it's not this perfect place like I thought it would be for years. Now that I've visited numerous times, I've begun to notice that the operations are surprisingly lackluster, and the park has a weird superiority complex that I've never really experienced at other parks. On a busy day, Cedar Point can just be a drag to get through. But still, I adore the crap out of Cedar Point. I'm sure I always will. It's definitely one of the greatest parks in the world, but narrowly it missed the top spot. I only recently decided to give the number 1 spot to Kings Island in Mason, Ohio. Look, I've traveled to theme parks all over the world, and I've come to the conclusion that usually when they're owned by big corporations, they aren't run as well as they could. This is by far in a way the biggest exception to this principle, as every single visit you are guaranteed a phenomenal experience. Each time I've been, it's actually been really crowded, but due to swift operations on coasters that have high capacities in of themselves, I've never really minded. The park is impeccably well taken care of with a great layout, fantastic landscaping, some nice modern themed areas, awesome food, and a very pleasant atmosphere. Everything is at the top of its class compared to its sister parks, and of course Kings Island also has an outstanding lineup of rides. Maybe not as impressive as Cedar Point's or even Magic Mountain's, but still one of the deepest and most varied coaster collections in the world. Oftentimes, people can't decide on a favorite since there's like a top 5 here. Orion, Diamondback, Mystic Timbers, The Beast, and Banshee are all absolutely spectacular, and with how often this park receives major investments, I'm sure more big attractions will join this list in the future. Kings Island is one of the few parks I've ever been to where I'm not sure I can think of a significant complaint, so for me there's no question about it, this is the best theme park in the new Six Flags Entertainment Company. So there you have it, every single one of their parks ranked from worst to best. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to give this video a like if you enjoyed it, and subscribe to Coaster Dash for more content like this in the future. I'd love it if you could comment and let me know how you rank the parks on this list that you've been to. But until next time, see you all very soon. Bye everyone.